Good afternoon. Welcome to Chik-Wauk. Great to have everybody here. My name is Caroline. I work in the Nature Center. I'm the Nature Center Director. And I'm going to introduce Joe. He's joining us to talk about some of his bird banding and chickadee research. And I am very excited that he's here because I met him 6 years ago when I worked as a naturalist at Wolf Ridge. Joe started volunteering at Wolf Ridge in 2017. Prior to that, he had a career as a plant geneticist in the Twin Cities, and then retired up in Grand Marais, where he started volunteering at Wolf Ridge and Sugarloaf Cove, and started getting more involved with bird banding. And now he's going to share with us some of the research that he has been doing over the past few years, specifically focusing a lot on chickadees. So yeah, kind of exciting. Great, awesome. Well, take it away, Joe.
Do I have to stand here?
You can stand wherever you want.
So, obviously black-capped chickadees is what I want to talk about. They're my favorite subject, probably. I did a workshop in Costa Rica 2 years ago, and I heard myself referred to as that guy who talks about chickadees. And so I do talk a lot about chickadees, but I thought I would do three things. My plan is to do three things. One is to say a little bit about myself and my background. Two is to do Caroline and I talked, and to do a little bit about justifying in defense of bird banding, because we all get a lot of questions about are you doing more harm than you're doing good? You know, what's it really for? Do you just like to hold birds in your hand? All those kinds of things. So I have a little piece of presentation that I'll try to go through quickly, and then I'll talk about chickadees, because I love to talk about chickadees. First, about myself. I got an undergraduate degree in wildlife management and fisheries, and worked for the Missouri Wildlife Department for 9 months, and decided it wasn't real science, it was farming. I was wrong, but that's what I decided at the time. And so I went back to graduate school to get a grounding in real science. Then I worked for, I have a career of about 40 years, doing 37 years doing plant genetics. I worked for a bunch of biotech startup companies in the beginning, and then the last 24 years or 25 years I worked for Pillsbury and General Mills. So that's kind of where I'm coming from. My passion in all that time was birds. From the very beginning, I've been following birds around, and you can ask my friends about not only chickadees, but birds too much sometimes. So that's pretty much about me. Let's go to the defense of bird banding. Okay, you can hit the next one. So as I said, we get these questions all the time about why are you bird banding? What good is it doing? And this is what's going on right now. In 2020, I guess 2019, there's a paper published in Science that said, that looked at the number of birds that we have lost since 1970, and it's like almost 3 billion birds. There are almost 3 billion birds less today than there was in 1970. You can see the drop. The data actually comes from some really cool science where they used an X-rad radar and actually calculated the mass of birds that are in the air during migration. So it's kind of a key thing about numbers. Okay, next slide. That's the 2.5 billion birds. That's 28%. I was around in 1970, and I think that there are 30% less birds today than there was then. It's pretty astonishing. And it's just a migratory species because of the way they did the studies. They're really not talking about resident species. Let's see what the next slide is. And so, why do we bird ban? So my point about the loss of birds is we really need to know what's going on with these birds. And so one of the ways to do that is to do research, keep track of the populations and what's going on. And one of the ways to do that is bird banning. Bird banning started, most of you know what I'm talking about when I say bird banning. It's putting little numbered license plates on birds and then trying to recapture them, basically. So the bird banning is part of the 1916 Migratory Bird Act, in which Canada, U.S., and Mexico, actually Canada and the U.S. signed on to it. And the idea was that these migratory birds don't belong to either country, but belong to everybody, and so we should start keeping track of that. So in the U.S., the Fish and Wildlife Service said we don't want anything to do with it except for the birds that we hunt, right? So then they said, okay, the U.S. Geological Survey has to take care of all this data, and so so it got the non-game birds got pushed off onto the U.S. Geological Survey, and they started printing bands with numbers on them, in which and keeping track of that big database what those numbers are, who's putting them on, where they were put on at, the size of the birds, and all those kinds of things. They didn't want to do any research. They just said, we'll administer the bans. And it turned out that Canada really didn't want to administer the bans either. So the U.S. Geological Survey is actually managing all of those bans, the non-game bird bans, for both Canada and the U.S. Since then, there is a Canada organization that's working with the U.S., but Canada still uses USGS bans. Mexico still uses USGS bans. So most of the bans that are out there, the U.S. is keeping track of all that data. So people were putting. You have to be permitted to be able to put bans on birds, and to get a permit, you have to have a reason. And early on, you could use education and outreach as a reason. Lately, they've pushed the whole thing to you have to have a research project. It has to be real research. You can't just be banning birds. To ban birds. And, one of the reasons is that the return rate. So if we were to ban the bird and hope that it flew somewhere else and it got banned again, that return rate, which we call a recovery instead of a return, is less than 1%. So not very many of those bans actually get caught again the second time. However, if we put a ban on a bird here during the nesting season or during the territory season, the odds of it coming back are about 22%. And so birds have a tendency to come back to the same territory. So the USGS, the bird banding laboratory, is the controllers of the USGS bans. The data was just kind of flipsy-flopsy stuff, and some people were doing projects. Anyway, it was not coordinated very well. In 1983, I think there's the next slide. In 1983, the Institute of Bird Populations, I'm wearing my slag shirt here, decided that what we really should be doing is really trying to standardize the data and to really try to keep track of what these populations are doing. So they started this thing called MAPS, which is Monitoring Avian Productivity and Survivorship. And there are about 400 sites, 300, it's down to about 300 now, sites around the US. They came up with a protocol, and the protocol is the same at every one of those sites. So all of the data that they take is standardized. So we really can start to compare from one year to the next and from site to site what's going on with these populations. So they started in 1983. It's a huge chunk of data. Bird population data any one year doesn't tell you very much. Any 10 years gives you an idea of kind of the trends that are going on. 20 years, you know, you get better and better data as you get more and more. And so a little bit about the protocol. It's 10 weeks. It starts at a period when the birds are coming back to their territories, so we're getting those, what we now call recovery. So the birds that were here a year ago or 2 years ago or 3 years ago, birds have a tendency to come back to their same territory. So we get an idea of what happened, what the numbers went down, what's going on, wherever they're flying off to, South America, Central America, and so forth. And then, so that period goes on for about 2 weeks or 3 weeks, and then they start nesting, which is where they're at right now. And they're actually, we're actually seeing a dip in the numbers that we're being able to ban because they have chicks right now, and the chicks are in the nest. When the chicks are in the nest, they just go to the nearest insect and come back to the nest. So to catch them in a net is difficult. You understand how we catch the birds. So we use a thing called a mist net. The MAPS protocol is the net was, when the MAPS program starts, you choose these net sites, and the net sites are the same net sites every year, so really get a sample of what's going on. The nets are really fine fishing nets. I mean, that's what it's like. They're black nylon threads, and we try to set them up. They try to be set up in the shade, and the birds have a hard time seeing them. And they consist of panels, so there are 5 panels, and with the net panel there's a very loose net, and so when the birds fly in and hit the net, they get kind of tangled up into that netting, and when we go grasp them out of the net. We run the nets about every 30 minutes or so that they're not in the net very long. And then we bring them back to a station in which we collect all the data that we collect. So we try to age them, we try to sex them, we weigh them, we take several measurements, lane length and tail length, and things that will tell us a little bit about what's going on. So then that's the kind of nesting season, and then we start seeing youngsters. Okay, and the youngsters, we can really tell the youngsters from the adult. That's a very easy thing to tell. They have juvenile feathers. I'm not going to go into all that, how we do that, but we can age birds. Either the birds that were born last year and are back here now, we can age them. They're different than the birds that were born before that. But once they've been gone and back a year, they're basically all the same. So we can tell whether they're equivalent to 1 year old or 2 years old, 3 years old, 4 years old. They'll look the same after that. Or we can tell whether they were just born this year. Okay. They do bird banding training. They do some of the same program in Central America and Northern South America. It's called MOSI. And then they have a MODIS program, which is to put radios, small radios on migrating birds, and they have a series of towers, and we can tell when they're going back and forth skip out of that. If you look at, not all the birds decline. There's some that are doing really well. Raptors seem to be doing okay. Next slide. Ducks seem to be doing okay. Next slide. Woodpeckers seem to be doing okay. They're all three species, or all three groups that have management programs behind them. We don't know what other programs, it's hard to say, but we do know that if you have a management program behind it, we can keep those numbers up. So that's the kind of thing that we really need to be doing. And that's the thing that bird banding is going to help us do. Okay, one more slide, I think. What we've done in Minnesota, so these green dots are where all of the maps stations are at. You can see that we've formed a group right here. In Minnesota, we have 5 map stations, and the reason is we're the really only boreal forest set of map stations. And so we tried to get a bunch of map stations in place in which we can get a better feel for what's going on in the boreal forest. We're calling ourselves the Minnesota Arrowhead Bird Collaborative. That's kind of a new thing, but that group. Okay, next. This is just a report that's done every 2 years by Dave Grosheks, who's a wildlife biologist at the Superior National Forest, and he's using the MAPS data to actually put together a survey and a set of data that then can be used for management research. Okay. Done with that? Everybody okay with what mapping is and why we need to do it? All right, let's go to the chickadees. Chickadees are great fun. There are 7 chickadees in North America. There's the black-capped tits, so the black-capped, the Carolina, the mountain, and the Mexican. And then there's brown-capped chickadees, which is the boreal, the chestnut-backed, and the gray-headed chickadee. The gray-headed chickadee is actually across the whole Arctic, so it goes over into Asia and Europe, Eurasia. Okay, next slide. Here are 6 of them, not the gray-headed chickadee. The black-capped chickadee looks an awful lot like the Carolina chickadee. And the one over there is the mountain chickadee, the one in the corner. This one's a Mexican chickadee. It kind of looks like the black-capped chickadee. And then there's the gray-headed group. You can see or the brown-headed group. And that's our boreal chickadee and the chestnut-backed chickadee. What do I want to say? So, the black-capped chickadee and the Carolina chickadee overlap and they hybridize. But the black-capped chickadee is genetically most closely related to the Mexican chickadee, so you can't always go by the way they look. Okay, next slide. This is the range map. To a geneticist, an evolutionary geneticist, range maps are pretty cool. You can see the range of the black-capped chickadee and the range of the Carolina chickadee, and they overlap in that little band right across the top, southern Illinois, and Ohio, and off that way, and that's where they hybridize. And they're really the only real difference. We can do in the hand. We can do some measurements, and we can tell a black-capped chickadee from Carolina chickadee, unless it's a hybrid, and then it's kind of in between somewhere. So they're really hard to separate visually, and they have a different song. And the hybrid sings a hybridized song. So I would think that the boreal chickadee and black-capped chickadee might genetically overlap, but they're in the two different groups. The Mexican chickadee, you can see has that long line that goes up through Canada up to British Columbia. Then that might overlap, but they don't. Mexican chickadee is way south. He's not part of it. Okay, next slide. And here's that gray-headed chickadee, which is all across the Arctic. We just get a few of them in Alaska. It's Arctic. What's I don't know. I lost the word. Yeah.
Circumpolar.
Yeah. Yes. Okay. Next slide. So here's the black-capped chickadee again. Is that like a little movie one? Can you make it? The guy's flying it now. There we go. So I volunteered at. So what I didn't say when I was talking about my background, in 2014 or so, I retired. I got retired, and I traveled. So that was okay. We traveled for a little while, but I really started to miss science, and so I ended up going to when I was living in the cities, in the Twin Cities. So I went to the Bell Museum and said I have this set of tools that I can do, and that I'd work for free, right? So they gave me a project to work with marshrooms, doing DNA analysis with marshrooms from looking at study skins, dead skins. It was great fun. And in 2017, I moved up here because I wanted to be close to here, Boreal Forest. And there are no DNA labs around that I could, so I had to find something else. So that's when I went to Wolf Ridge and said, hey, I'll volunteer, I just don't want to teach. And Peter Harris said, oh, I got lots of things for you to do, right? So the first thing, he gave me a bunch of projects, but one of the first things was they had been putting colored bands, just every year it would be a different color. They were just trying to keep track of the years, and it was January, and he said, why don't you hang around the bird feeders, because they have these big bird feeders there, and keep track of the color bands that show up. Well, in January, when it's 20 below, it's hard to sit outside. Second of all, these bands on these chickadees in the wintertime, they fluff up, and they don't like cold feet either, so they're really hard to see. And so then we started talking about there's got to be a better way to do this. So that's when we came up with the idea of pit tags. I don't know. So this is my pit tag feeder. What's the next slide look like? So this is a fun one, I think. So everybody thinks chickadees are cute, right? So I do a lot of reading about chickadees. So I decided I would make a list of all the things that people said about chickadees, right? And you look through magazine articles and scientific articles, and they're all anthropomorphic terms. We put those terms. But if you look at them, a joy to watch, constant motion, acrobatic, smart. I don't know how they get smart. Tough, and then things like underrated flying fluff balls, chubby puff balls, acrobatics. So after working with chickadees for 7 years now, so this is what they're mean, they're aggressive, and they're compulsive. So those are my anthropomorphic. And they really are compulsive. I really believe that if a chickadee sees a black sunflower seed, it's just got to go hide it somewhere. And we'll talk about why in a minute. Okay, let's move on. Okay, this is where I was going before. So at Wolf Ridge, we have these giant feeders. Mark helped me build some of these giant feeders. That wooden feeder holds 40 pounds of sunflower seeds. And the idea is to keep what Wolfridge is. It brings 5th graders, 6th graders, 7th graders from public schools. They come there for either 3 days or 5 days, and they experience the outdoors. And so we want them to experience birds, so to keep these feeders full. And there's always birds around these feeders, lots of chickadees around these feeders. And so Peter had this banding this color band program, but the real questions to me and to Peter were, well, how many chickadees are there actually using these feeders? And how do chickadees in general use feeders? Are we really helping the chickadees out or not? So we wanted some way to kind of think about how we would do that. So we decided we would put pit tags on chickadees. The next slide is a pit tag. Oh, back up then.
Keep going. Oh.
Yeah, let's go forward. Okay.
Here's a pit tag.
There's the pit tag. So so we could put these little tags on them. I had one here. It's just a little plastic tag. You can pass it around. Doesn't weigh very much, weighs about the same as the other band, the metal band. So we have to put, every bird we catch, we have to put a federal band on. That's kind of what's stated in our permit. But you can also get a permit to add auxiliary bands, and this would be called an auxiliary band. In that little piece of plastic is it's the same thing you would put in a cat. That's actually the smallest size for a cat to putting in for your chip a cat. If you're going to chip your cat, you would put that in. Dog, you put a little bigger one in. I don't know. They make some really, really small ones. So it's a glass capsule, and in that glass capsule is a coil. And when the coil comes in contact with a magnetic field, it creates a pulse of energy, pulse of electricity. And then also in there is a little chip, and that little chip throws out a radio signal when it gets this energy thing. So then you can have a reader, which is like a card reader, and the reader just has these antennas. So this thing here, and the antenna, the card reader pulses with electricity, creates a magnetic field around there. If there's a pit tag in there, it throws out a signal. So the pit tag reader pulses, gets magnetic, and then shuts up and listens for a radio signal, and pulses and shuts up and listens for a radio signal. And it does that like 60 times a second or something. Wow. It's doing it all the time. So anyway, we decided we put these on the chickadees. We could keep track of who was coming to the feeder. Oh, I know what the other set of slides were all about. The other question was, were we actually helping chickadees or not? And so can you go back to? And so if you look at what people think might be the positive effects on chickadees, larger clutch size, decreased incubation time. So it's basically helping the health of the chickadee and helping the fecundity of the chickadee, creating more. And then people talked about the negative effects, and that's increased predation, clutch size, and all those kinds of things. So there is a group that studies mountain chickadees in the Sierra Nevadas. Okay, that's the next slide. And they came up with an 11-year study. I think the first one is 9 years. And they tracked mountain chickadees at 2 different elevations, fed or unfed. So you have one set of feeders here and another set over there. And they really couldn't tell any difference between any of them. So their point was that we don't know if it really doesn't look like we're hurting them, and it really doesn't look like we're helping them. So it's kind of a zero-sum sort of effect. Okay, now we can get that part. So back to this. There's a number associated with this pit tag. We put the pit tag on by sliding this little metal wedge into the plastic band. It opens up. We stick the chickadee's leg in there and pull the metal wedge out, and then close it back. And that's the aluminum band. You can see it's the same size. The weight of the 2 bands, the Federal Bird Banding Lab is very specific about how much weight you can put on a bird, and it's a person. Can't remember exactly. It's like 0.3% of their weight. Anyway, the 2 of these weigh up are less than 0.3%. Okay, next slide. This is some of the statistics that came out. And this is from a 2-year study. I'm going to give you data from 21 and 22, I think. 2 years. The total number of visits in those 2 years at these feeders was 256,124. So they're using these feeders a lot, right? The maximum number of visits in any one day is 3,000 something. The maximum number of individuals per day, and that's a number that we wanted to really get, was 55 individuals in any one day in 2021, and 44 in 2022. And then the average percent of the banded chickadees is 58%. So we could take those 2 numbers and estimate the total number of chickadees that we're using our feeder. It comes out to be 80 or 85, which really surprised us. We didn't think there were, none of us would have guessed that there were that many different chickadees using those feeders. So that's a really nice piece of information that came out of this study. One individual in 2 years came 12,555. The maximum number of days visited in 2 years by one individual is 326. So he was basically coming there every other day, right? At least, right? And then the maximum number of visits by one day by an individual is 437. And so, I mean, it sounds silly. It sounds like a giant number, but I worked really hard to make sure I wasn't double counting chickadees. So I can set up the feeders so that if the same bird is there consecutively, there's a 3-second gap. And so if he's gone for 3 seconds and comes back, it counts him as a second visit, which is a long time. But if he's there during that 3 seconds, it doesn't count. So if he's there for 3 seconds, that doesn't count. So we also find, though, that I have another algorithm that I run on the data that basically identifies ones that were there for a long period of time, and so when I clean the data, I throw those out. So the numbers, I feel like the number 437 is a real number, which surprises me. Okay. So if you look at the data across dates, this is what it looks like, and the reason it's so up and down, up and down, up and down is I can't keep the feeder full all the time. I live an hour away, and they can empty the thing in a day. And there are lots of, it's not the only feeder they have access to, so there are all those other feeders. So it's kind of, they could be going anywhere, right? So when it runs out of seed, they don't show up on the, makes sense, right? So then I tried to figure out how we could get around that. Next slide. You can do, you can do 5-day running averages. Next slide. But if you just plot the points and then ask the computer to draw a curve on it, this is what you get. So this is September. This is August, and that's September again. You can see the number, and the feeder's full all the time. The feeder's already all there. So the numbers ramp up to January, February, December, January, February. Those are the top numbers of visits. And then in March, it just like plummets, right? And so why is that? Well, it's pretty obvious that they're not hanging around the feeder, and when they're breeding and when they're feeding their young. Okay. Next slide, I think. Yeah. Now there's the March 15th date. One of the cool things about this is all I can say is it might be a coincidence, but in 2021 we had I would say average snow, so we'll say that one's average, right? In 2022 we had a ton of snow, right? And we had a very cold spring. And so if you look at the rate of fall off here and the rate of fall off on that one, they left the feeder a lot faster in 2021 than they did in 2020. And then 2023, how's it go? We had no snow, right? But I think I'm going to have another good year this year. I actually haven't worked about that much yet. Okay, next slide. Quickly, if you just look at, these are all individuals, the line is an individual, and here's the gap. Here's when they were not there in the summertime, and you can see some individuals came back across that gap and others didn't. You can see where there's dots, that's the day they were there, and when there's a straight line through it, that's the day they weren't there. So, this guy was here once, and he was not there for a long time, and then he was there 3 or 4 days in a row and so forth. So that looks like that. Let's see the next slide. If you look at the 2 years of this 74 that I had that was banded, some of them disappeared, so that's why the number's not 50, something like 55. 40 of those came back the second year. So about 50% of them are coming back. And then I banded 28 new ones that second year, so that's how that looks. And then these are all guys who were here. The years prior to this, we were learning how to do this, so this is kind of messy data down here. Next slide. We'll get through this in a minute. I think that was when I was trying to say about the fall off. I don't know why I have that there. Okay, next slide. And if you go in the papers and you read about stomach contents, you'll find out that in the wintertime, their stomach contents are 80% plant material and 20% animal material. Then in the summertime, it flips around, right? So they're eating mostly insects during the summertime. Pretty obvious, they're seed eaters. But that's why that's going on. Okay, next slide. So we're pretty harsh winters here. If you're a chickadee or a bird, you can run away from it, right? You can fly south, or you can hide from it. Birds can't, but mammals can. or you can just deal with it, right? And chickadees deal with it by doing three things. One is they eat a lot, so they keep their metabolism sky high. Two is their insulation. And three is they can, when it gets really cold, to regulate hypothermia. So, so they can kind of go into a stupor. Okay, I think we'll go through these real quick here. They eat a lot. The real takeaway here is when it's 0 degrees outside, they eat 60% of their body weight. And if you look at what 60% of their body weight, they weigh about 10 grams. 60% doesn't look like all that much. But what I tell fifth graders is I weigh 170 pounds. 60% of 170 pounds is 60 plus 42. It's 102 pounds I have to eat a day. And then I say, you know how many quarter pounders? So it's like 108 quarter pounders. But they have a really high metabolism. Their heart rate's 450 per minute. Their body temperature is 104. And that's all because of the surface area. You know, it's the bigger the sphere. Okay, next one. And their insulation is pretty cool. We actually had to change the MAPS protocol because it's hard to say they're not molting because they continue to put on feathers all the way, body feathers. We use molting as one of the indicators when they've gone through their molt. But if you look at the body feathers, a chickadee continues to put feathers on all through the fall and into the winter. So he's insulating more and more and more and more. And these are contour feathers. So they have a nice contour here, but they're this fluffy base, right? So that's where the insulation comes from. And birds have a set of specialized muscles in their skin, and they can actually fluff feathers up so they can control the feather this way, or they can control the feather this way. So yeah, so it's pretty cool. So they can vent, right? Or they can fluff them up and stay warm. Okay, next slide. That's the insulation. And then there's this regulated hypothermia. They can just go through, they will, when it's really cold, they'll try to nest a bunch of them in a single cavity. So you'll see them in the wintertime and their tails are all bent up. Their tail feathers are all a mess. And they're all a mess because they're all like huddling together in some little hole somewhere. And then when it gets really cold, they can save 20% of their metabolic energy by just lowering their heart rate. So they go into a torpor, right? And they can lower their body temperature. And they can lower it as much as 18 degrees, which would, I think if we lower our body temperature, it was 2 or 3 degrees, we're done for. Okay. And I can go into why they do it, because they can shuttle circulation around. This is really cool circulation. Let's go on. Let me get to the fun stuff. A chickadee's cache food, and this is that business about them being compulsive. And they're called scatter hoarders. So they remember where they cache their food. For a long period of time, it turns out. So there's been studies, you know, that they 30 or 35, 40 days, they can remember where they put that seed. But the food caching is seasonal. They don't cache. It's just one like dipsy thing. They're not doing it in the summertime. And they have this spatial memory, which has been really studied by this group in the Sierra Nevadas. Next slide. Yes, there it is. Well, this is really cool stuff, I think. So, sorry. So their hormone levels go up and down by photoperiod, which means they can go up in the wintertime and down in the summertime, right? And they have a hippocampus like we all do, which is the front part of your brain, and that's where you remember where you put your keys and where your pencils are. And that's where they remember where they put that sunflower seed. And so because of these hormone changes, I'm not sure if I have it on the next slide or not, but we'll talk about it here. They can actually increase the size of the brain by quite a bit. I put the numbers. The hippocampus gets 40% larger in the wintertime, and in the summertime it gets smaller. Right? So they grow these neurons, and then they degenerate during the summertime. It's like, why do I need them? I got to fly. It's extra weight. I don't. Mexican chickadees, who don't cache food, don't have that. They have a very disorganized hippocampus compared to the black cap or the mountain chickadee, and black cap chickadees from Mexico, New Mexico, have a smaller hippocampus and less spatial memory than ones from Alaska. So anyway, they grow on your brain. They're remembering where they put these things. Okay. Okay, let's skip that. So, I really wanted to know of my 80 chickadees that were coming to these feeders, whether or not there were subgroups, whether or not there were family groups, and whether or not it was mom and dad and 6 kids, and they're all like hanging together. It turns out the behavioral research shows that it's not mom and dad and 6 kids. It's dad and a couple females that are making these groups. But I really, because I had a personal identification on all of these guys, I wanted to really be able to map those groups. Right? But with 80 chickadees, I've never been able to really figure out who was who and what was what. And the other thing that was going on is that if we looked at the 80 chickadees at one building in Wolf Ridge, and we looked at the 80 chickadees in the other building at about 8/10 of a mile away, they don't cross. They don't mingle. They mingle very little. I don't get very many chickadees moving from the Feb to the Ed building. So they're not moving. So anyway, I wanted to figure out another way to do it. Right? So I was frustrated. So I started this thing in Grand Marais. I called it Grand Marais Chickadee Project. I went on the radio with Peter Harris and CJ, and I asked people if they saw chickadees with the tag on them, if they would let me know. And then I would put a feeder at their house. Okay, next slide. Well, there's Grand Marais. There's the little block around my house. Okay. So you all know Grand Marais. It's a little, often I have to explain to people, well, it's a little town with and a donut store. So this is where I live, and that's where I was doing the banding. I have people tell me that this house is about 100 yards away from my house, and he had chickadee. This is Aaron and Sarah. They had chickadees coming to their house. This is Kay. She had chickadees coming to her house. So I had a chickadee feeder that I moved around. Like I said, 2 chickadees. I moved around and I kept track of who was going where. These two kind of overlap somewhat, but on any one day, there might be a group here and a group here that were different. So within about 100 100 yards, they seemed to be, they were moving back and forth. Over here, they not so much, and those over there, these are completely different chickadees, a completely different group. Even though I abandoned them here, I abandoned them in the fall, and by winter time, these guys were holed up over there. So Caroline's balking. So what's going on, I think, is that when they find a source of feed that's constant, why would I go anywhere else, right? I got all I can do is grab that. Somebody keeps putting more seed out there and I have to go hide it somewhere. Okay, is that the end? Oh, yes, there I measured the distance between those houses. I didn't really follow up on this one very much. I followed up on those two versus these two. And then last year, I kept a feeder full-time at this house and at this house. So this year, the data, I might be able to sort out some of that. Are they really moving in groups, or is it always mixing up? I don't know. I think that's it, is it? There you go. I did it. Questions?
Yeah, I have a question, Joe. Do the songbirds follow the same flyway system that migratory waterfowl follow? Or is that more dispersed?
Oh, you mean like the eastern flyways?
Yeah, the different flyways that we know on migratory waterfowl follow.
Yeah. Yes and no, because they're coming from different places. But what your question is, so what I can say is there's definitely a divide on the Rockies. So if you're in Mexico and you're Nashville warbler, and you came from California and you went to the same spot in Mexico, you go back different routes, even though they all look the same. We all think they're pretty much. Does that make sense? Am I getting what you're asking?
Yeah, but I mean the waterfowl follow a pretty distinct arteries of migration.
Yeah.
And it's not that way with songbirds.
Yeah, it kind of is. Yeah. But you would, there is an eastern flyway, sort of a central flyway. Turns out the central flyway, if you're, for songbirds, do you fly across the Gulf of Mexico or do you fly around the Gulf of Mexico? Mm-hmm. So there are those kinds of things that some species cross the Gulf of Mexico and others don't. It has to do with kind of where they come from. The study I did with marsh wrens was really cool, and there were 7 different places in Mexico where marsh wrens went. And one of those places had marsh wrens near Mexico City that doesn't migrate at all. So they were resident birds, and then there were these other groups, and these other groups, went to the same spot. So you could draw 7 different lines from several different places in Mexico. So they were going to different spots in the U.S. too. They really weren't local. So then you call those, because of gene flow, you call those separate species, or are they all one, right? The one that doesn't migrate was about as different from all the other mushrooms as 2 different species of warblers. Genetics. And yet, when they were dead skins in the tray, I don't know what museum birds look like, but popsicle stick, right? I couldn't today I couldn't tell apart. So,
How do they measure or pick the size of the campus, you know, on the birds as far as?
really want to know?
Well, I mean, is it, I mean, just comparative, you know, like birds that you've caught that have died, then you were able to dissect the brains and?
Yeah.
Okay.
I don't know if they all came from study skins, but most of the study skins, yeah, I don't know how they did that. Whether they were doing MRIs or
Yeah.
CT scans.
Just the fact that
Scissors,
they're
right?
different, I mean, that just is fascinating that they can change the size of their brains.
Yes. Yeah. That makes you wonder whether we change the size of our brains. I mean, I have a hard time finding my keys. I was much better at it when I was 22.
And quick question on, have they figured out some theories of why the bird populations were declining overall, or is there any?
Yeah.
I suppose different species are different.
Yeah, but mostly it's loss of habitat. Yeah. The reason I brought this big book in, Caroline and I were talking about it, and this is like a new book that's only been out for about 3 weeks. And it's it's, you know, a new book, and it's all the breeding birds of Minnesota, and it goes by every species has its own page, and it talks about where they breed, what they look like, where they breed, all of those kinds of things. But what is really interesting is in the back. So it's basically talking about populations of birds and how well they're doing, because you can tell by the breeding territories that are going for them. But in the back, this is what Caroline and I have been talking about. It's an Audubon study done in 2019, and it has to do with some other U.S. weather data, and it looks at the species. So this is a list of species in Minnesota, and it's got a 1.5 degree temperature change, global warming temperature change, which we're probably going to hit sometime between 2030 and 2050, they say, but we're probably headed closer than that. And you can look at the species that are going to be gone. And then it's got 2 degrees, which we're going to hit after 2050, but before 2080. The number goes way up. And then the third one is 3 degrees, which we'll probably hit by 2080. And the number that's lost is 27 in that first group, 41 in that second group, and 66 in that third. So global warming is going to play a really big part in what's going on with birds. And it's happening, the reason is it's happening so fast and the birds can't really evolve fast enough to keep up with it. So getting changes in habitat and changes in insects that they eat, the food that's, so this is going to be hard for them to keep up with.
Are chickadees territorial?
Or what?
Are they territorial?
Especially during breeding season, yeah.
And then do they return to the same nest every year? Or do they build a new one every year?
They build a new one every year. Are there any more slides? You want to hear more? You have the, oh, they're not there on this one.
You can come.
There
Oh,
are
here.
pictures of nest trees.
I don't think there's a picture of a nest tree on here. There's pictures of their feathers, though.
Oh, yeah. So we tell young chickadees, first year chickadees have this pointy tail, and after first year chickadees have such rounded tail. And they're not, there's have all this there. So.
Do you want to look? Here,
This is what I was looking at.
Oh, this one here.
Yeah.
There we go.
Oh, this is just ages. So we have 12-year-old chickadees.
Sorry.
These were 2 years ago. Caroline and I on last Wednesday, wasn't it?
Yeah. Yep.
Banded. Was during maps. We caught in one net. We caught 2 adult chickadees and 5 babies. And the 2 adult chickadees we banded in 2018. So they're 6 years old and they're doing pretty well. Having 5 babies. Okay, next slide, next slide, next slide.
Okay, there's this one. There's that.
Next slide.
There's this.
Next slide.
That's the last one.
Oh, okay. So the point I was trying to make is that people talk about black-capped chickadees are the only chickadee that pecks its own cavity, creates its own cavity. All the other chickadees don't. And living in Minneapolis, I had nest boxes in my yard, and I always had chickadees nesting in my nest boxes. I come up here, I decided I would really like to ban baby chickadees, and so I put a whole bunch of boxes out. They've been out now for probably 6 years, and no one's used them. And I think the reason is that birch trees is what chickadees really like to nest, and they really don't have a bill that's conducive to building cavity in most trees. But in birch trees, the bark is hard, not hard, but stays there, and the tree kind of rots. It's kind of soft on the inside of that. So it's really not hard for a chickadee to burrow a little hole and pull all of that stuff out of it. So I think that's why people think of them as being the only chickadee that can build their own cavity and don't have to steal a woodpecker cavity. Okay, sorry, I'll quit.